Picasso once said that we don't understand the generations that come after us. We understand the artists that we work with and the ones who came before, but we can't see the people who come after. I think he would have been interested in the kind of work I saw that Caroline was able to do and to show this fall in New York, because it was very visible work and it had a lot to say. So it might have challenged his lack of understanding. The art world that I grew up in the 1960s was very rigid, codified. Minimalists, pop artists, very strong genres, basically ruled. If someone were to show the diverse kind of work that Caroline showed, they would run the risk of being called a group show, or worse, being considered retrograde because they weren't advancing art along a certain pathway that got you to understand what you were looking at in terms of movements, historical forces, constructs of one kind or another. We still have the legacy of that art in our universities, which are dominated by theoreticians. We're not interested so much in how work gets done as to why the artists did it in historical contexts. I think Caroline, in her work, started to look for something that was less codified, mixed things up, and I think it shows a kind of direction that those of you who came after us are going to be following. So I think she put something out that maybe it's not that easy to understand, especially if you're old-timers like me, but has a certain significance beyond just the work of a highly gifted, well-trained, and extremely pleasurable artist, which is what she is. I first met her while she was doing very elaborate metalsmithing, and I thought of her as a kind of designer and a sculptor of process, dramatic elements like masks, combining a lot of different formats in her work, a lot of excitement, a lot of visual explosions. And when I went to that show, I saw all sorts of different sides of her. Some of them were like that, but others had their own quality. I think primary importance is we're used to thinking about New York as a destination, but a lot of people come to New York from places, particularly Europe, Paris, that were artistic destinations in their own right, and where we sent people all the way up into the 1950s to basically learn what it was to be an artist. And Caroline is part of the flow that reverses that trip and brings these people to New York. But being in New York doesn't make her a New York artist. She comes from somewhere. She has certain visual traditions that she brings with her. And I think, you know, again, going back to the 1960s as a kind of seminal direction that so many people pursued, the sensuality in her work and the Mediterranean quality. I can't think of any other word. That fullness of life, you know, that you see in paintings by Matisse or sculptures by any of the people who did beautiful figures throughout the beginning of the 20th century till, say, the midpoint. Picasso, certainly. These all had the kind of weight and substance and pleasure in the visual experience. And I think she shared some of that, not because of what she gained in New York, but because of what she brought with her from the part of the world that she comes from, which is about light and the pleasures of life and a sense of well-being that a lot of people, you know, just automatically put with a Côte d'Azur. My memories of it, certainly, were filled with that. And I saw a lot of light and color and motion in the work. And it went from one genre to another as she exercised herself, different ideas, painting, sculpture, design. There was a kind of a pleasurability, a love of the visual world. It reminded me of a movie I saw a long time ago called Contempt. It was done by, of all people, Godard, Jean-Luc Godard. And it was kind of a potboiler of a movie, but there was one section in it where the director, it was a movie within a movie, Fritz Lang, was talking about the Greeks. And he said they weren't interested in all of these deep psychological elements. They were interested in the way things looked and the way things were in the visible world. And their idea was form, not to go dissecting everything to try to find all kinds of hidden meanings. I don't know if he was right or not, but I think that her kind of work is about creating the surfaces, creating the opulence of existence. You know, Andy Warhol said, if you want to find me, look at my paintings, that's all there is. She's not saying that. She's not restricting you from looking at a lot of things. She's not saying, just look at this, that's all I am. She keeps bringing additional things in. So as you're looking, you're seeing more and more. You're not seeing this narrowness. Part of this 60s mindset was that one used materials in very honest ways, meaning most of the time very limited ways. I had one teacher who refused to make objects, and he made stairways into pits. And this was his work. He'd been trained as an architect, so he could do the isometric drawing or whatever else was called for to design. I don't know if anybody ever built his staircases to nowhere, but he felt that the proper place for a work of art was where it couldn't be picked up and detached from anything else. Caroline, I think, is much more of a carpetbagger. She brings a whole bunch of things to the table. And you kind of, it's more like a Middle Eastern bazaar. And you pick and choose among the things, and then I guess there's a kind of a bargaining process where you want to see how much you can take of this, how much you can take of that. She certainly doesn't turn off the spigot and say, that's all you're going to get. Just look for me here. And that, I think, is something that's not long overdue. I think that's something that's happening in New York now, and it's not really recognized as something that's important, possibly because we can't see what comes after us, but more likely, like, was it Louis XVI, they said? He never learned anything, he never forgot anything. Good description of the New York art world.